Appalachia. Everybody in the world has a reaction to that word. It makes folks think everything from beautiful mountaintop views, dangerous hillbillies running through the woods with a rifle in one hand and a jug of shine in the other, to trailer park drugs and blame near everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch along the eastern U.S. from Canada through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. Folks that live in these mountains have seen and endured enough things to happen to them to make a preacher cuss. Hello, I'm Larry Bentley. I was born in the Appalachian Mountains of southwest Virginia, and I was raised there by folks who lived for generations right there in the heart of them old mountains. Come with me and we'll take a look at some of the odd, awful, or legendary things that have happened within my beloved mountains, and we'll be traveling around a bit, looking through the eyes of an old Appalachian at some of the crazy that done spread itself around outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 6 of Appalachian Murder, History, and Legend. Howdy, my good friends. I hope you're doing well and the world's treating you fair today, and your biscuits are round, cornbread are square, and, well, neither of them turn out looking like a crick rock. Thank you kindly for stopping by, and today we're going to be talking about my favorite kind of story. You know, the kind that crawls right up underneath the floorboards of official history and starts knocking around like a possum in a crawl space at 2 o'clock in the morning. Something the big talking heads try to ignore. Now, I reckon every generation grows up believing a handful of things that later turn out to be shaker and a screen door on a rattled old rotted out woodshed. But for me, one of them things was Christopher Columbus. Back when I was in school, which historians now refer to as the late Jurassic period of Appalachian education, we were taught that Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, and that was pretty much the end of the discussion. Closed case, put it in ink, and move on down the road to the next bit of pontificated poop. Now, every once in a while, we'd all hear something about Vikings. Maybe some feller named Leif Erikson drifted over here in a boat wearing a horn hat looking like the lead singer of a heavy metal band. Or maybe we'd hear something, or maybe somebody say something about the Melungeons being here several generations into waiting for him. But back then, if you wanted to pass the test and instead of repeat the 5th grade until you qualified for Social Security, you wrote down Christopher Columbus and just pretty much kept your mouth shut. That's just how history works while you're in school. Official history ain't lies exactly. It's more like somebody cleaned out the attic and decided which boxes was worth keeping and which ones got hauled off to the dump. And the older I get, the more I realize there's a whole lot of history sitting out there in that dump. One of the biggest surprises of my life happened when I looked at a little place called Morristown, Tennessee, tucked up in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, where the fog hangs low enough to where some mornings you feel like you ought to paddle a canoe to work instead of be driving. Now, Morristown's one of them places where the mountain folk hold on to them dump stories where history remembers them or not. You can feel it in your bones just as quick as you get there. And one of them stories, hiding in them hills, is about a man named Melville Murrell. Now, unless you're from around there, you probably one of them history hounds maybe like me, that dig around through newspapers for entertainment. You probably hadn't never heard of old Melville Murrell. But let me tell you something. There's a decent chance that old Melville was flying through the skies of East Tennessee while the Wright brothers are still wearing bonnets on their heads and diapers on their asses. So come on in, take your shoes off, set a spell while I tell you about the Flying Appalachian. That's right, folks. Years before Kitty Hawk, years before the Wright brothers became household names, and even years before aviation became a thing folks trusted enough to climb up on and ride without writing the last will and testament first, there was a mountain boy in East Tennessee building him a flying machine. Now, I know some of y'all are probably thinking, well, now hold on there just a minute. Ain't no way some Appalachian fella was out there inventing airplanes before the Wright brothers. And I understand that reaction because, well, I had it too. But this story's older and odder than a soup sandwich. Melville Merrill was born in 1855 in what was Jefferson County, Tennessee. Later on, that area became Hamlin County. Now, back then, Tennessee was still rough around the edges. We're talking muddy roads, horse wagons, oil lamps, and folks working from daylight to dark just to survive another winter without freezing stiffer than a fire poker. His father was a farmer and a grocer, and by all accounts, were respectable, hard-working people. And but Melville, well, Melville's mind was pointed toward the sky. Now, folks say that when he was around 12 years old, he strapped cabbage leaves to his arms and tried to fly. That's right there is where the most Appalachian thing probably that I ever heard in my whole life. But you ain't lived until you watched a young East Tennessee boy jumping off of something with produce attached to his elbows while his mama screams from the yard and his daddy, well, stands there and just calculates how much this trip to the doctor is going to cost. Now, we all know that Appalachia, well, always produced at least two kinds of people: folks smart enough not to do something like that, and folks who are wily enough to think they can fly and eventually, I guess, invent airplanes. Now, most young boys would probably try something like that once, bust their backside wide open, and, well, decide flying might not be meant for human beings after all. Well, not in Melville. No, sir, that little cabbage leaf disaster must have lit a fire under him hotter than a July asphalt. Now, he started building bigger projects, and when I say bigger, I mean pretty blame odd. Now, I've seen pictures and drawings of Merrill's machine, and folks, this thing looks less like an airplane and more like something you'd get if a lawnmower and a clothesline and maybe chicken coop got caught in a tornado together. That's one of them contraptions where you stare at it for about 15 minutes trying to decide whether it's supposed to fly or maybe shell seed corn. The machine had giant wings made out of lightweight wood panels with cloth stretched across a frame. Underneath sat the operator, who apparently had to flap portions of the wings manually during flight. Now, I ain't no aviation expert. I can barely operate a television remote without accidentally buying myself about $300 worth of programming that, well, in a language I can't even understand half the time. But from what I do understand, operating Melville's machine took the upper body strength of a circus gorilla. Now, can you imagine? Nowadays, folks complain because they got to walk too far through the airport to get to Starbucks. But here's Melville Merrill, and he was apparently out there performing CrossFit in the sky just to stay airborne. And here's the thing that really gets interesting. He actually received a patent, not just local gossip or mountain legend, an actual United States patent in 1877 for heavier-than-air flying machine. Now, that phrase, heavier than air, matters because before that, most folks fooling with flight were thinking balloons, floating around, drifting around like a drunk uncle on a raft in the New River. But Mr. Merrill, well, he was thinking about powered flight, mechanical flight, a machine carrying a human being through the air. And according to local accounts, witnesses saw the thing fly. Now, before some internet aviation experts start foaming at the mouth and throwing calculators at the wall, let's be fair about it. We ain't talking about a modern airplane. This thing probably weren't streaking across the sky at 600 miles an hour while handing out peanuts and traumatizing folks with baggage fees, anything like that. But if it left the ground under its own operation, if it achieves controlled lift, that's a significant history story that don't belong in the dump. And that's where the debate starts. Because history is funny about who gets remembered. The Wright brothers succeeded spectacularly, repeatedly, and publicly. They refined the process, and they documented things, and they kept building. Mr. Merrill, well, he didn't. And honestly, that may be the most Appalachian part of the whole story. See, after receiving his patent, well, Mr. Merrill, well, he pretty much quit aviation. Now, if that had been a Hollywood movie, well, he'd have marched off to New York gathered investors, smoked cigars with industrialists, and become a king of aviation. But in Appalachia, things, well, hardly ever worked like Hollywood. Instead, Melvin Merrill, well, he stayed home. He cared for his widowed mother after his father passed away, and he got married, raised a family, and eventually he spent 45 years as a Methodist circuit rider. Now, younger folks may not know what that means or what a circuit rider is, but a circuit rider was, well, basically a traveling preacher. My great uncle Press Fowler was one. Back in there wasn't much, wasn't enough ministers to station one at every tiny little mountain church, so these fellers rode horseback from place to place, preaching, baptizing, marrying, burying, and probably eating enough fried chicken at church socials to shorten their life expectancy to about 30 years. And honestly, there's probably something a little more beautiful about that than anything else, because while the Wright brothers became world famous, well, Merrill, he became something else entirely, part of the mountains themselves, I guess you'd say. He stayed rooted, and that's a thing we mountain folk understand. Ambition's one thing, but home has a pull stronger than gravity. Now, there's another strange little wrinkle in the story. The Merrill family home itself eventually developed a reputation for being haunted. And folks, well, I guess you knew we was going to end up here eventually, because no Appalachian story can just be normal. That would violate some kind of ancient mountain law, I think. Now, the old family property sat high on a hill overlooking the fields where Merrill, well, supposedly tested his flying machine. Even today, parts of the old home still stand. And over the years, people started telling stories. Lights shouldn't be, and odd sounds, feelings of being watched, the usual Appalachian haunted house starter kit. And now whether any of that's true, well, who knows? I've reached the age where I no longer doubt anybody saying anything about ghosts, and because honestly, there are too many things in this world we just don't understand, and particularly in the Appalachian Mountains. Now, plus I've been, well, spent enough time in the old mountain houses to know some places just feel could be ghosts, I guess. Sometimes it might be the mold, but could be generations of maybe unresolved family drama seeping into the wallpaper like a nicotine stain. Hard to say, but here's the wild part. Planes taking off from Morristown Regional Airport can reportedly see the old Merrill property from the air. And that airport itself used to be called the Moore Merrill Airport. So in a strange sort of way, I guess, aviation finally come home to the man who may have helped start it all there to start with. Now, if you're wondering what happened to Merrill's original machine, that's another interesting little thing. For years, parts of the flying machine were held by the Smithsonian Institution up in Washington, D.C. And, well, let me tell you something now. If the Smithsonian's holding on to pieces of your homemade Appalachian sky bicycle, well, you probably did something noteworthy. And being that they're in control of the history, it's a wonder that, well, there's any of it to be found. But eventually, the remnants were returned to Morristown. Today, you can still see parts of the machine, including pieces of the wings. They're on display at the Rose Center. Now, the Rose Center ain't just some dusty little room with 3 moth-eaten pamphlets and a volunteer asleep behind a desk. It's Morristown's cultural and historic center, and it's packed full of regional history. They've got pictures, plans, displays explaining Merrill's work, and enough local artifacts to keep a history buff occupied longer than a raccoon in a corn crib. They also house the Medal of Honor displays for 2 local World War I heroes, Edward Talley and Calvin Ward. If you ever want to restore your faith in humanity just a little bit, spend some time reading about Medal of Honor recipients. Them boys did things under fire that sounds less like reality and more like somebody accidentally mixed up history with a Hollywood movie. Now, there's also a children's book about Melville Merrill and his flying machine, which honestly delights the heck out of me to no end. Because somewhere out there right now, there's probably a little Appalachian kid reading about the mountain inventor who tried to fly with cabbage leaves strapped to his arms. And if that don't inspire creativity, I don't know what does. Though hopefully it inspires engineering creativity and not a trip to the emergency room kind of creativity. Now, the one thing I love about this story is how perfectly Appalachian it really is underneath all the aviation story. Here was a man from rural East Tennessee dreaming about human flight decades before airplanes changed the world. He didn't come from wealth, he didn't come from the prestigious scientific institution, and didn't have a venture capitalist throwing money at him like candy at a Christmas parade. He just had curiosity, persistence, and apparently enough stubbornness to look gravity square in the face and say, well, now I reckon we'll see about that. That's mountain people in a nutshell. Folks outside Appalachia sometimes underestimate mountain folks because they focus on poverty or isolation and overlook natural ingenuity. But Appalachia's always produced inventors, builders, mechanics, musicians, and my favorite, storytellers. People who could repair an engine with baling wire and determination while cooking beans over a fire at the same time. Necessity makes creative people, and sometimes creative people build, well, airplanes. Now, I reckon history probably got this one mostly right in the end. The Wright brothers undeniably changed the world. They developed sustained controlled power flight and documented it in ways that nobody could ignore. But stories like Merrill's matter too, because history ain't just about who crossed the finish line first. Sometimes it's about all the dreamers who started running before the race was even had a name. And somewhere up there in the hills above Morristown, Tennessee, a young man once sat underneath homemade wings and dared to imagine humans flying through the clouds. That dream alone deserves remembering. So if you ever find yourself wandering through East Tennessee, maybe take a little side trip through Morristown. Go by the Rose Center, look at the remains of that strange homemade contraption, stand there a minute and imagine what folks must have thought watching some mountain feller pedal his way into the sky back in 1870, or in the 1870s. I suspect at least half the country thought he'd lost his natural-born mind, but then again, most visionaries probably look crazy right up until the second they proved everybody else wrong. I appreciate you folks sitting with me today as I rambled through one of Appalachia's little-known stories. Until next time, keep your coffee hot, your eyes open, and if you decide to strap cabbage leaves under your arms and jump off the front porch, make sure somebody's recording it for historical prosperity, or maybe hysterical prosperity. Hope you got something out of our story today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you're watching, maybe on YouTube, Rumble, or Spotify. Maybe throw us a like if you don't forget. And come on over to the Appalachian Murder Mystery and Legend podcast group on Facebook where we talk Appalachian or about anything else you want to talk about. And I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian Murder Mystery or Legend. I will see you then.